Hey guys, Mo Muller here. I run an agency called nichewebsitemanagement.com where we help clients with starter sites all the way up to those worth over $1 million in valuation. And in these videos, I'm going to help you scale, build, and grow your website for absolutely free. Let's get into today's video. So today's video is a very realistic and honest video for me. It's something that I wasn't too sure if I wanted to share, but I feel like it makes sense because it hopefully will help someone not make the same mistake, and you can learn from the mistakes that I make and save money, save time, etc. I also feel like in this industry, it's very easy to show the kind of sensationalization lines of high revenue, high traffic, someone that's made like a really big mid 6-figure, low 7-figure exit, but people don't really share their losses. And I don't know why that is. So hopefully in today's video, you are going to get an insight into what happens if things don't go right. It's very important building content sites, building niche websites, and in business in general to understand that there are risks and these are things to take into consideration. So let's get into how I lost over $100,000 in under 12 months with 3 niche websites. So number one was a hosting website. Now, one thing that I have definitely learned moving forward in this industry, understanding and scaling and doing lots of more due diligence on lots of different sites, is there are specific niches that I would recommend that you don't get into unless you have a ton of cash. So you have hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest, and you don't mind seeing returns until later on in the future. Now, one of those niches that I learned probably the hard way was the hosting niche. So I acquired a site in the hosting niche. It wasn't very expensive. It was a domain. It had a few articles on it. It had a decent age domain. So I paid a few $1,000s for the age domain. And my thinking at the beginning was to really scale out this hosting website. Now, as you can imagine, the hosting niche, so we're talking about websites and services that allow you to host and buy hosting on their shared or private servers. And also the VPN niche, which is like virtual private networks, similar to hosting, but not exactly the same. But these two niches have ridiculously high affiliate payments. So for example, if you are a customer of GoDaddy, Cloudways, of Hostinger, for example, and you sign up to their affiliate program, they usually pay somewhere in the region of $100 to $350 per sign up. Now, as a brand, for them, it makes perfect sense because usually once someone signs up to a hosting, like a website, for example, a blog, they stay for 12 months, 24 months, at the very least. Usually it's years. So they will pay a high CPA, cost per action, to any affiliate that will provide them access to a customer, and then they'll make their money back in the long run. So for me, it made perfect sense. I would start up a hosting website. I would try to get at least 10 to 15 sales a month. It would scale to around $2,000 to $3,000, and then I would sell it. So conceptually, it made a ton of sense. But here's the issue. Whenever you're buying sites, whenever you're building sites, you need to do an extremely smart amount and efficient amount of competitor analysis. And one thing that I didn't check specifically was how competitive even the very, very low search keywords and search volume was. So it was kind of common knowledge that generally hosting will be competitive. Something that I hadn't envisioned was how much money it would take to really scale a small site to get onto the SERPs and actually start to compete with the bigger brands. So here are the numbers. I invested around $10,000 in content, which isn't a lot, and I invested around $5,000 in links, building backlinks, guest posts, etc. I also spent around another $5,000 on the domain itself, and my aim at the time was I had 1 or 2 projects, and that would be my main one. Now, around 4 months in, I realized that things probably weren't going to go to plan because after spending all that money, I saw very little traffic, even to the lowest competitive and lowest commercial pages. And unfortunately, even to right now, I still have the domain. I actually think it just expired about last week. I ended up not doing anything with it because the competition was way too high. So learning point number 1 is, unless you have a big budget, don't go into a competitive niche. Now, number 2 is my second biggest loss. Around 6 months after the hosting website, I decided that I was going to go all in a totally different niche market, something that wasn't as competitive, and it had lots of juicy keywords that had low competition. So in my mind, I kind of learned from mistake number 1, no high competition, and I was going to scale the website, build out topical relevant solos in a more lower and a lot easier industry and niche to go into. So that niche was the DIY niche. And at the time, I just started to understand what age domains were, and I decided to take the leap after jumping on a call with one of the owners of an age domains website that I used called odis.global. So I picked up a premium age domain. It was around $5,000 for the domain. And this time the plan was to spend small chunks of money slowly over time. So the plan was to build out around 5 solos, spend around $3,000 to $5,000 in each solo, and the overall total cost would be around $30,000, but spread over 6 months. So for me, it made sense because I could see if it was working, and if it didn't work, I could maybe pull the plug, or if I did find out what was working, I could invest more in that specific area. Now, for this particular website, things did actually go quite well. It was an age domain. I had a little issue at the beginning because some of the content was not topically relevant for what the previous version was. So I ended up wasting a bit of money and time trying to push Google into seeing the brand as something new, when I should have probably just added content that was similar to what Google was used to with the site being an age domain. Anyhow, around month 6, things started to trend up in the right direction. I was accepted onto Ezoic, which at the time I think was 10,000 page views. It's not now. I think you can sign up at any amount of page views. So starting from 0. So things were moving in the right direction. And then, unfortunately, around the 6-month mark, I got hit with a core update. I think it was a September core update, and the website just fell off of a cliff. Now, this was one of my first times ever really getting hit by a core update. Usually around that time, the core updates would pass and it wouldn't really affect my traffic that much. But this particular site got hit really bad. And as time grew on, I realized why. So this was an update that was based around product reviews. So when I first purchased the site, my content plan was to have hundreds of commercial posts and have a few informational posts in between those that were ranking those posts or supporting those posts, but mainly have commercial posts. At the time, it was working quite well. I would see low competition keywords, low competition competitors in the space that had maybe 100 articles, and of those, 50, 60 or 70 were all commercial, and they were ranking quite well for low competition keywords in the DIY and tool space. So for me, after doing all that competitive research, which took months, I followed suit. I built out the content plan. I propped up commercial pages with some supporting pages, informational ones, and I started to saw some awesome traction. I was really getting happy. When the product review update hit, everything just fell off the cliff. And I think for me, it was the first time I realized that you really are at the whim of Google. And whenever they change their algo updates, if your website doesn't fall in line with what they currently have as best practices, you're going to pay a price. And for me, that price was in and around the 30K figure. Now, unfortunately, I had already spent all the money on those commercial pages. I couldn't get that money back. And the only thing left for me to do was probably to keep it, to see what would happen maybe in 6 months or 12 months, or just sell it. And I ended up selling it. I made a rash decision. I was very upset about the losing all that traffic. It was in the heat of the moment, and I sold it for a very low multiple considering. So learning point 2 is core updates will definitely hit your website at some point, whether that's the first 6 months or at some point in the next 5 years, you're going to get hit. And you need to have a plan mentally on what you're going to do. If not, you'll probably make a rash decision, which I did, which led to me losing money. So please don't make the same mistake. Now, number 3, this was my biggest loss in the website investing space. And hopefully I don't lose as much money as this moving forward. But I do think it's part of a understanding of what can happen in this industry. It does have risk, and you need to understand what you're buying. And also circumstances that are beyond your control can have an impact. So after having a few successes and a few losses, I decided that I'm just going to buy a website now instead of building one. So I went over to Empire Flippers at the beginning of 2020 and found a really good site that I thought would scale really well. It had low competition, it had high traffic, it already had lots of revenue coming in. The backlinks looked amazing. And overall, in terms of due diligence, I was impressed. But there was one fundamental problem. This site was in the travel niche. And as you probably remember, a fair few years ago now, most of travel got shut down, right? COVID happened, etc., etc. So to just summarize, I bought the website for around $65,000. It was doing around $1,700, $1,750, $1,800 in revenue. And I was really happy when I first bought it. And for the first 2 months, it actually propped up in revenue a little bit just by doing some CRO and some on-page things that I did. And then after COVID hit, everything went down, traffic went down, revenue went down, and I ended up not knowing what to do, if I'm being honest. COVID lasted for almost 2 years, and this was a travel website that was selling suitcases. So as you can imagine, there wasn't much I could do in the niche, in the space. No one was buying suitcases or carry-ons or luggage, for example. Again, I ended up selling the website at a loss. So I think the lesson for number 3 is there may be some circumstances where you don't have control over your website, and it's something that you're going to have to factor in either in the long term, or potentially you're going to have different sources of traffic that can mitigate that. And for me, obviously, a travel website at a time when people wasn't traveling didn't really work out. Potentially, I could have held it, but at the time, there was lots of unknowns. Anyhow, the point of this video is this. It's important to understand that there's risk involved in buying, growing, and selling niche websites and content sites. And you need to understand those risks before you get involved. Now, I run an agency, so I see firsthand what can happen if you buy the wrong domain, you buy something that is a bit spammy or a bit risky, and things go downhill. So just to end this video, I just want to give you one piece of solid information that I learned the hard way. And that is, probably don't put in any more money in terms of growing a site, building a site, or buying a site that you can afford to lose in the short and medium term. Now, if it's money that you can afford to lose, obviously that's a bit different. Or if it's an investment that's going over several years, again, that's a little bit different. But if it's food that's going to come off your table tomorrow, next week, next month, it's probably best to budget a bit better and de-risk a little bit. Anyhow, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.